like to introduce our first speaker. We are delighted to start this year's program off with an update from the National Club Association. For many years, the NCA has been a regular part of our MGA President's Council, and we are glad that Joe Trauger, the NCA's President and CEO, is here with us again to provide a legal and legislative overview of issues impacting our private club community. The NCA has served as an invaluable resource for thousands of clubs and club leaders across the country for more than 50 years. Although noted for its influence on Capitol Hill, the NCA's professional staff is always available to answer questions and provide advice on compliance, governance, tax and legislative issues at the state and local level as well. As an experienced government relations professional with numerous legislative and regulatory successes on Capitol Hill, Joe brings extensive experience and respect as an association lobbyist with tremendous knowledge of the issues facing clubs today. He also has firsthand experience with the community, a longtime member of multiple clubs and former president of Mount Vernon Country Club in Alexandria, Virginia. Joe will provide an overview of where current proposed regulations affecting clubs stand in the process, a legislative outlook for the remainder of the year, some election discussion, and provide some insight on what's at stake for clubs under a new administration and Congress. Joe brings a wealth of knowledge on the ever more complex landscape facing clubs today, and we are delighted that he is here to kick off this year's educational session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the NCA, Joe Trauger.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I hope somebody believes somebody. Great to be here again. I think this is my 4th or 5th year at the MGA President's Council. I just want to say that this is a great event. I look forward to it, coming to it, to meet you and talk with you each year. And as we get things kind of set up, as was mentioned, the National Club Association is an association that represents private clubs. So not just golf, we have city clubs, yacht clubs, athletic clubs, and a few hunt clubs in our membership as well. We are the only organization in Washington that represents private clubs. And so as a result, I am not only the CEO and president of the National Club Association, I'm its chief lobbyist. And you can imagine my father's disappointment every year when I tell him, yes, Dad, I'm still lobbying. It's it has a reputation of, well, not a very good reputation, but at any rate, it's a pleasure to be part of the National Club Association and represent private clubs in Washington. As was mentioned, I was president of the Mount Vernon Country Club 2019 and 2020, so leading up to the pandemic and through it, which was a really strange experience for anybody that went through it in terms of either being professional staff at a club or on the boards of staff. How many here were on their board during the pandemic? So quite a few. So, and how many meetings did you have every week in the beginning stages of that? It seemed like every day, right, or every other day, because everything was moving and changing almost hourly. So the National Club Association during the pandemic, we opened up our resources to everybody. Didn't matter if you were a member of the National Club Association or not. And we believed that was the right thing to do and the responsible thing to do, so we could all share the resources as we went through it. So I'll start as we're waiting to get the presentation up on the screen. I mentioned my father's disappointment about his son being a lobbyist, but I'll tell you a little story. So I worked on the Hill for about 10 years. I worked for the majority leader and the majority whip in leadership, had the office in the Capitol, would go to the House floor every day, all of that kind of stuff. But as you might imagine, there's a lot of hours, you work quite a bit. My eldest daughter, or elder daughter, I left the Hill when she was 3, and she basically thought I was the telephone. She'd point to the telephone and say, Daddy. She used to run around and play in the rotunda when she'd come up for a visit. At any rate, I left the Hill and went to a lobbying firm, and my then wife and my daughter were at our club, and she was saying something about my new job and all that kind of stuff, and Kay, my daughter, tugged on the other person, the other member's shirt tails and said, "Daddy doesn't work anymore, he's a lobbyist." So, true story, and just an indication of how things can change in terms of the time that we spend, whether it's work or providing a life balance. So anyway, talked about the National Club Association a little bit already. We represent private clubs across the country. We do have some Canadian clubs in membership. We also have some clubs from Colombia in South America. So we provide a comprehensive collection of resources for board members. One of the things that was important to me even before I joined the staff of the NCA, as I was becoming president of my club, I told my GM that we weren't members and that we should be members of the National Club Association. I can tell you from firsthand experience, an ongoing experience. They're no longer on the board, but the resources that the National Club Association provides are critical for board members to understand their role and how they can better serve their clubs. Real quick on membership, you all have these slides, so I'm not going to go through a lot of this, but those are our resources. I did want to spend some time real quickly. I know that there's going to be an economic impact study on golf, right? Talked about later, correct? So what I did want to share a recent economic impact study that was done. It was sponsored by the National Club Association, the Club Management Association of America, and Club Benchmarking. This is probably the most comprehensive study that's ever been done on private clubs. And again, it's not just golf, it's all private clubs. So city clubs, yacht, athletic, hunt clubs, all that kind of stuff. So we've never really had a good grasp of what the market looked like. We had a lot of guesses, we had a lot of, well, you know, how many private clubs are there in the United States? We think there's around 3,000. Above a certain revenue, we think there's probably 5,000 total. So we've gone through the work and determined that there's 3,887 clubs, private clubs in the United States with more than $1 million in revenue. And the reason we chose $1 million as the sort of cutoff is anything below that, we tend to have members acting in terms of operating the club and that kind of thing. Anything above $1 million, then you start to you start having professional staff. So the market segmentation is 82% of those 3,887 clubs have golf, whether it's 9, 18, 27, or whatever the number. 82% are also golf and country clubs. And importantly, for discussion in Washington and some of the debates that we anticipate coming up next year, 77% of private clubs are member-owned nonprofit organizations, and that's going to be a key factor for us to discuss a little bit later. So when you take those 3,887 clubs, there's $32.6 billion in annual revenue, and that number is increasing as dues increase and more clubs come online, and we are seeing some new clubs come online. I think there's Colin, what is it, half a dozen or so in South Carolina alone, and then we've got another 5 or so in Florida. Yeah. So we do have new clubs being formed, so that number is going to continue to grow. Our payroll expense is about $17.4 billion. If you look at the club benchmarking data, that tracks in terms of what the average club spends in payroll versus other inputs. And we have over 500,000 employees. Now that's just the direct impact. We also looked at the indirect impact and also the induced impact. So that $32 billion, $32.6 billion becomes $156 billion when you take all the indirect economic activity that's created by private clubs in the local communities and also the induced impact. So we're talking about a fairly sizable part of the economy, and the amount of of money that it injects into local economies is not insignificant. So we also went through and broke these things down by region. We are in the Northeast region, specifically the Mid-Atlantic, I believe, includes New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So in the Northeast region, we're looking at $7.5 billion in revenue, 33.8 in payroll expense, 140,000 employees. That's a tough slide to read. These are all in your packet. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on them, other than to say in the Northeast region, it is the second most densely populated region for private clubs. The first, as most people would expect, is in the southeast on the Atlantic side, specifically South Florida. Here you have the regions and all the breakout, and again, I'll let you all peruse through those numbers. You have them on your USB. Statistics by region. There you see the Middle Atlantic. Average revenue per club is $8.3 million. So let's get into the fun stuff. Right now in Congress, they're out of session for the election. They're coming back on November 11th after the election, and we'll have a clearer picture of exactly what's going to happen. When I say clearer picture, about as clear as mud. There's a lot, always, when we get into the situation where we're at right now, there's always a lot of talk about what's going to happen in the lame duck session, between the election and the next Congress. There's always high hopes, there's always, big dreams, we're going to get this, that, and the other thing done, and invariably, there's widespread disappointment because the only thing that gets done is appropriations bills. And I think that's probably what we're going to see this go round. The Senate has passed a number of their appropriations bills. The House has passed a number of theirs, but they've not gotten anything from the president. So we are under a continuing resolution right now, which just means suspending, limits from last year are continuing through this year until these appropriations are done. The reason the appropriations process is important for us as private clubs, not that we have direct federal government, grants or subsidies into the private club world. But it's important because it funds some of the agencies that we believe are important. Specifically, the Department of Homeland Security. What does Homeland Security have to do with private clubs? So Homeland Security is also the division that runs the H-2B program. And we have a lot of H-2B participation, particularly in the Eastern Seaboard, from the Northeast down to the Southeast. What we expect, I just had lunch with a congressman from Maryland who's on the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Committee, one of our key allies on the H-2B program. It's his view that we are going to be in a good position going into the appropriations process or negotiations in terms of requiring the administration to release additional visas. Right now the program is capped at 66,000. The agencies have the authority to increase that number, almost double it, another 65,000, but they have to go through this process of notice and comment every year to release those visas, those additional supplemental visas. So that's in the works. There's some question about how this process is going to go. Speaker Johnson has said that he doesn't want to do a big omnibus bill. Omnibus bill was a $1.3 trillion appropriations package that has historically been done in December. Merry Christmas. He doesn't want to do the huge omnibus bill. He also doesn't want to do smaller minibus omnibus bills. So I'm not sure exactly how this process is going to play out because there's no way to get it done without packaging some of these together and moving them through both the House and the Senate. Obviously, the White House right now very much in a state of sort of emergency response mode with the hurricanes that happened, with the events in the Middle East, in Israel, and Gaza. Also, the Ukraine conflict is definitely high on the priority list for this White House. And they're basically going to be in this mode until January 20th. And basically what they've stated they want to do is just continue implementation of regulations and that kind of thing. So don't expect to see a lot of fireworks coming from the White House in the coming weeks. So getting into the specific issues, the Department of Labor has figured prominently over the course of the last 4 years. We had a change of administration from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration, and that typically means that the pendulum swings from right to left in terms of the labor policy, and that's definitely what we've seen. This administration came in, started undoing a lot of the Trump administration regulations that were deemed to be too friendly to business, and either repealed them entirely or adjusted them or just went ahead and did other things. A few of the regulations that I did want to talk about today. It was mentioned earlier, the employee classifications in terms of independent contractor. That rule has been finalized, but one thing you'll notice that's in common with all three of the regulations up there is that they're currently being litigated. So there's currently 5 lawsuits that have been filed pending in terms of independent contractor status. We don't know how it's going to play out. I've tried to predict court decisions in the past, and it's a pretty perilous duty, and it can go either way, many different ways. So we continue to monitor that to see how it plays out. One of the things that the regulations that is particularly impactful, I think, not only the independent contractors, for those clubs that have a caddy program, that's obviously important, but one regulation that's affecting everybody is the overtime threshold. So the overtime threshold was the first tranche of increase went from 35,000 up to 42,000, I believe it was on July 1st of this year. On January 1st, we see the largest tranche. So it's kind of a 2-stage process in terms of getting to the threshold. And just to back up a little bit, the overtime threshold, for those of you who may not be aware, is the minimum amount of money an individual must make in order to be qualified to be exempt or not eligible for overtime. This has been something that has been a key priority for Democratic administrations for quite some time. The Obama administration back in 2016 did increase the overtime threshold, but they increased it to such a degree that the court struck it down, saying that essentially what they had done is they had made the duties test, which is another factor that must come into consideration in terms of determining whether somebody's eligible for overtime. It rendered it moot. So that was in the 5th District Court. And we have ongoing litigation with the current overtime threshold in the 5th Circuit. So it's the same court, but it's a little bit, it's obviously a different rule, and it's gone in different tranches, but again, it's dangerous to try to predict what a court's going to do, but I think there's fairly good precedent in terms of the potential impact of what is a very, very significant increase all at one time, moving from the 42,000 it is right now roughly up to 60,000 essentially. That's a huge impact across the economy, not only with clubs but just across the economy. So this is not my first rodeo with overtime regulations. I was with the National Association of Manufacturers during the Obama administration, headed up their labor and healthcare policy shop. And essentially what I said, and I will say about this rule as well, is essentially that this is the most significant piece of regulation or significant regulation that is essentially, it demotes millions of people in the workplace. So you have an individual who was considered exempt and reap the benefits of that, whether it's professional training, all of those things that can go along with not having to pay somebody overtime, or not to worry about overtime. So professional development, all of those types of things. That's going to be cut back because now clubs or businesses are going to have to really monitor individuals' time and keep track So we're continuing to watch the legal situation with the overtime regulation. Like I mentioned, it's in the Fifth Circuit. We'll see if they affirm their ability to do that and go that high. The third one is the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, walk around regulation. And essentially what this is it allows OSHA inspectors to bring a third party along with them on an inspection. And you as a club, you as a business have no say in whether or not you're going to allow this person who you don't know what their background is, you don't know if they have expertise in the industry, you don't know if they're an attorney, you don't know if they're a union organizer, you have no idea who they are. But they can just sort of latch on to an OSHA inspector and walk around and see the most, behind the scenes stuff at your clubs. Obviously, we have a concern about that. We want to make sure that if anybody's being escorted around a private club, that there's a reason for them to be there, and that we know who they are, where they're coming from, and what their agenda is. So this is a regulation that is it's really important from my perspective to maintain the integrity of OSHA's program. Once it starts being used for some other purpose, and we do see it being used for other purposes, you have a program that's not about occupational safety and health, it's about something else. Another rule that OSHA is looking at is on heat and illness and prevention. This is both indoors and outdoors. One of my favorite things to tell people about the OSHA's heat illness prevention program is that, is anybody aware of Energy Star? You know, that yellow sticker you get on a water heater or refrigerator. So there's the Energy Star program, and then there's the Department of Energy. And do you know what temperature the Department of Energy and Energy Star say you should set your thermostat at in the summer? Any guesses? 80? I heard 80. A little high. 78. Okay? 78. So OSHA decided that we need to prevent, exposure to heat and prevent illness from exposure to heat. They just put out in July, late July, I think, the metrics by which they're going to determine whether or not somebody's exposed to high heat. Any guesses on what their trigger point is, the trigger temperature? 80 degrees. So there's 2 degrees of difference between what the federal government says you should sleep in. Absolutely fine. 78 degrees, go to sleep, do whatever you need to do. But if it goes up 2 degrees, all of a sudden it's an emergency, and we need to start doing all these different protocols to protect people. It's insane. So, at any rate, OSHA's been walking down this road, and I'm not trying to diminish the impact or the importance of exposure to heat in the workplace. It is an issue. We need to be, responsible about it. But the thing is, Colin reacts differently to 95 degrees and humid than I do. It is, yes. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that people react to heat differently and adapt to it in much different ways. So what we did when we contacted the agency was we basically just told them, look, understand why you're doing this, but don't be overly rigid. Don't be prescriptive in terms of the things that you need to do for engineering controls or administrative controls, that kind of stuff. Let employers create an environment where employees and employers can collaborate to address these issues. They kind of followed our advice, but yeah. So we're continuing to go through that. The proposed rule is still open for comment by December 30th. I don't think we're going to see anything. The earliest, if they close the comment period on December 30th and don't extend it, which they probably will, the earliest they could come back with a final rule on that would probably be March or April. So we could be well into a new administration by that point. So, but it's something we're keeping an eye on. We have weighed in on it, and we'll weigh in when the comment period ends. I mentioned the H-2Bs and the appropriations process. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes. H2Bs, I've already talked about that in the context of the appropriations process, so we'll move on. 2025 tax costs. This is what I was talking about in terms of the economic impact study that we've done, and the importance of it in terms of advocacy. Like I said before, we didn't really have much, very good data in terms of what the overall market looked like, what the impact of private clubs was in local economies, and certainly nationally. So there's the mother of all tax bills, the mother of all tax debates that's coming up next spring, the 2017 Trump tax TCJA, something like Tax Cuts and Jobs Creation Act expires, and with that are any of the decreases in corporate taxes, individual taxes, all of that gets sort of thrown up in the air, and we have to figure out how it's gonna land. So lawmakers right now have been in the process, particularly in the House. They've formed different working groups on different issues, tax being one of them, to look at those issues and see how they plan on responding to it. This is important because whenever you get into legislation where you're opening up the tax code, that invites people to start talking about, well, who can we tax that we don't currently tax? Or are there some dials that we can move up and down and generate more revenue so we can pay for some of these tax reductions? So that's something that we're concerned about. One of the issues that's been bandied about in Washington recently is to start taxing nonprofits. Obviously, that would have a significant impact on private clubs that 77% of clubs that are considered nonprofit. We're still, we don't have any hard proposals out there yet, so it's difficult to imagine exactly, what sort of avenue they would take to tax it, whether it's dues or initiation fees or revenues, and we just don't know. But it is something that we're keeping an eye on. We're starting to talk to members of Congress about that to make sure that they understand that private clubs are groups of individuals. I mean, the very definition is that they're groups of individuals that collectively use their funds for recreation and social activity, and that has not typically been taxed. It's a big debate coming up. Obviously, the elections and those results are going to have a significant impact on what direction they go, but it's something that I just wanted to highlight as one of the issues that we're looking at. Also mentioned on the tax side, there's a piece of legislation that we've been pushing for a number of years called the Personal Health Investment Today Act. That would allow people to invest some of their health savings account money into fitness-related activity. Environmental policy, WOTUS implementation, this has been subject to Supreme Court decisions. The agency's gone back and revised the rules. There's some quibbling about whether or not they actually revised them in such a way to comply with the Supreme Court. So this is a 20-year battle that's been going back and forth, and we've had 3 different regulations that have been passed or promulgated, and court decisions that have impacted all 3 of those. Healthcare policy, there's some potential discussion around some pretty low-hanging fruit in terms of healthcare policy in the lame duck, but again, I don't really see that happening. So, want to get into some of the election stuff. We did a poll last week or the week before of NCA members within our sort of LinkedIn group, and just asked them who they thought was going to win the presidential election. 69% said Donald Trump, 31% Kamala Harris. We also will be having a full election briefing tomorrow morning on a webcast, and I've got a QR code that you can scan to sign up for that. And here it is. So tomorrow morning, I think it's at 10 o'clock Eastern, and feel free to take out your phones and do that to register for the webcast tomorrow. We'll go over House and Senate races and obviously the presidential. So we have another poll that we've been doing. We have another webcast. Colin Burns will be joining me and Henry DeLozier from GGA and Robin Stoll from Spencer Fane to talk about member behavior. This is if you wouldn't mind taking out your phone and just voting in the poll, I'd appreciate it. This is something I started a couple of years ago, but we're sort of narrowing it down in terms of member behavior. And as a recovering club president, I know how difficult and sensitive it can be to respond to issues of behavior, particularly of members' kids. So it's something that we want to talk about. I mentioned we do have a webcast coming up on Thursday afternoon, and feel free to sign up for that. We'll have GGA partners, myself, and Spencer Fane, as I mentioned. Also want to give you a little teaser on the upcoming edition of Club Director magazine. This is our flagship magazine, and there you see on our cover we have Steph Curry and Sean Loving, who's the chef at the Detroit Athletic Club. He was the chef for the U.S. men's basketball team. So we've got a great story about his experience there. We also have stories about mental health in private clubs, looking at, since we're in a season change, welcoming the Snowbirds back to in-season clubs. And I also mentioned, obviously you have the slide deck in front of you that we've gone through today, but within the magazine we also have a more expansive explanation and background on the regulations that are affecting private clubs. So great addition to come up there, and that should be out in the next 2 weeks. Finally, thank God finally, wanted to highlight our National Club Conference for you all. That will be happening April 27th through the 29th at the New York Athletic Club, just off of Central Park. Very excited to be back in New York. It's been about 7 years since we've held our conference here. And we'll be doing events at New York Athletic Club and also the University Club, and we have some other clubs that we'll be visiting as well, that we're looking at trying to fit into our schedule. It's going to be a well-packed conference of education, discussion, gathering of general managers and club presidents, club board members, and we'll be talking about a whole host of issues from advocacy to insights on what's happening in the club industry, and just sort of more operational issues. So there's information that if you want to stay in touch, if you want more information about the National Club Conference, feel free to scan that and enter your information, and we'll go from there. I feel like I've gone over my time. But I wanted to answer any questions. Selection year, I was talking to Eric earlier. Usually by August, I have a pretty good feel of which way the presidential election is going to go. This year, I have no clue. I have a sense of the direction notionally. Things seem to be tending towards former President Trump, but there's been a lot of polls that have been released recently that have been coming from more Republican-leaning polling firms. So it's starting to have an effect on the averages that you see. So it's a different world. Obviously, we've not had a situation like what has occurred previously, but I do have a sense that Vice President Harris's support is pretty shallow and maybe declining at this point. But we'll see. I think it's fairly certain the Senate will be controlled by Republicans come January 3rd of 2025. The House is very much up in the air. No idea. We have 3 races here in New York State that are actually critical to who's going to control the party or control of Congress. Happy to answer any questions.